Thank you for joining us today for the Digital Dialogue. My name is Barbara Iverson. I am the moderator for our time together today. So for the benefit of participants who are blind or have a visual impairment, all of us who are speaking on screen will begin with a short self-description. So I'm coming to you live from Berlin, Germany. I am a white woman with medium-length wavy hair, and I'm wearing a V-necked black sweater. All right, today we are putting the spotlight on transcontinental gig work, what to do about the next round in global exploitation. The global division of labor in the industrial age is well known. The global south provides raw materials and cheap labor in its sweatshops for multinational companies from the global north to supply global markets. The digital economy functions similarly. The global south provides coltan and other raw materials as well as cheap online labor. A reserve army of gig workers, both in the global north and south, work as online contractors for the benefit of large companies mainly based in the global north. Given its transnational nature, what kind of self-organization or regulation does this new labor relationship require? Should it, yet again, privilege workers from the global north over those from the global south? Could opportunities for online work stem illegal south-north migration? Traditionally, unions organize the workforce in a specific sector and country. While unions have not been very successful at organizing the workforce of large digital companies, what could the role of other civil society actors be? Are ethical guidelines sufficient to protect gig workers, or is there a need for enforceable laws that stretch across borders and continents? So we're going to try to address some of those issues and questions today. And I will be joined by three people who will be sharing their experiences and their thoughts with us. And so the first, so we have Jane Tompeis from, she's a founder and director of the Toolkit Skills. And we have Nuno, who is a researcher in Lisbon, and we have Amelia, who is a professor at the Indian Institute of Management, and she is a lead researcher at FemLab. So each of our panelists, they're going to give themselves a longer introduction, but each panelist will give us their input for 5 minutes, and then we'll start with some discussion and questions. And again, if you have any questions at all during the time, please put them into the chat. We'll be collecting them and answering them later. So first, I would like to invite Jane to turn on her camera and unmute yourself. Come join me here on our stage, so to speak. Hi, Jane. You will have 5 minutes to share some of the points that you'd like to make, and would you please start with a visual description?
Thank you so much. I'm Jane Wigai Camphouse. I'm a Kenyan woman, and I'm wearing white. I think you can only see my face. I have a straight black hair, and I have white pearl necklace and earrings. Very glad to be here. Thank you, Barbara, for starting us off on this very important topic. I am the founder and director of the Toolkit for Skills and Innovation based in Nairobi, Kenya. And the Toolkit, we focus on skilling youth in various sectors, including digital skills, but primarily for them to acquire the skills that they require for current and future labor markets. When we talk about our work, we look at an ecosystem where we start with youth mobilization, identification of skills in demand, and exposing the youth to those skills, bringing them to the Toolkit Skills and Innovation Hub to learn the skills, which is followed by certification and linkage to jobs. When we talk of online jobs or the digital jobs, the experience that we have from Toolkit is one, there is a big opportunity on the online work for young women and men in Kenya. However, there is still very low awareness levels about the opportunities for the online work. Number two, about the quality and the decency of the work. And when we talk about a decent job, we are looking at various factors. One is, of course, a decent wage, a fair and a just wage for the work done. Secondly, is knowing what are the rights of the worker if something does not go well. For example, if they're going to do a task, a digital task, and they're told that their accuracy was not 100%, so they will not be paid. What is the recourse they have? Third is the issue of the transnational nature of online jobs. Because for Kenyan youth, the question that we have for the transnational nature of online work, when you look at the labor laws in Kenya or the labor laws in East Africa are easy to enforce, or at least somebody is aware of, if I'm not happy about this particular task or about what I'm paid or my insurance, or I'm paid through PayPal or another system where a lot of money was deducted in the international transfer of the payment, there would be an enforceable law. For the digital work, it is next to impossible for the worker to enforce anything because there is no law governing the employer, because that employer is sitting in the global north, and the employee or the worker is sitting in the global south, in Nairobi or any other part of Kenya. And I think these are key questions that we need to look at: the dignity of the worker. And in particular, I would just like to recap and say, first, we need to have an awareness framework. What are the rights of the online worker? Where is their recourse? The other important issue is the enforceability of human rights by the employer, because the companies that are offering these digital tasks are mainly in the global north. Do the laws in their country protect the worker that is in Kenya or in any other part of Africa? And if that is not enforceable as a law, what should be the threshold of decency in terms of the protection, the hours of work, and a minimum wage? Thank you very much. Barbara, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jane. Wonderful. So you can go ahead and turn off your camera and we'll come back to you to turn it on a little bit later. Right now, I'm inviting Nuno to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. There he is. Great. So you will now have 5 minutes for your introduction, and please don't forget to start with a self-description.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara. So my name is Nuno Boavida. I am a Portuguese white male with glasses and a blue t-shirt. I'm now broadcasting from Lisbon, where I live in Portugal. I am a sociologist, and I've been working as a researcher for Nova University of Lisbon for the past 10 years. My research is very much related with work and technology. So the reason I'm being here is connected with a research project we conducted in Europe, in 4 countries in Europe, in Germany, Spain, Hungary, and Portugal, trying to understand the profile of gig workers as well as their strategies for collective representation. The research project reached some conclusions which I would like to share with you, and I hope they could be useful for you and for your work back there. So on one hand, digital labor platforms allow access to labor markets, as well as provide limited autonomy and flexibility to those workers that need this type of work around the world, no matter they are in the south or in the north. It's an easy way to get to have a paid income. On the other hand, however, these new business models have created threats to the platform workers and organized labor, including risks associated with insecure, flexible worker. It is important to understand that from our research around Europe, we found a very diverse and polarized workers profile doing this gig work. This is quite important to the extent that it shows how different gig workers can be when we talk about it. So, for example, on one hand, we found up workers who are highly skilled, highly motivated, very individualistic, and can earn a lot of money. And on the other hand, we found workers who are barely qualified, working in care services, food delivery, ride hailing, who have encountered a lot of precarity, as well as a lack of professional dignity and even life-threatening working conditions in some of these countries in Europe. So we now face a lot of challenges. It's not just in the south, but also in the north. In our field work, we found out also that most workers are self-employed, not because they are really self-employed, but because they are deemed by these companies or these platforms as self-employed, which prevents them to have labor protections and access to social security, which is, as you might know, is a strong social security in Europe, and this is one of the rights that workers have here. It is also important to stress that these so-called self-employed workers do not have access to collective labor rights, or even, in most cases, to trade unions. There are a lot of factors that can explain these situations. The first of them is that not most, but many of these workers are immigrants, and they arrive here, they need a fast income, and they start working for these big companies, multinationals, most of them. And the difference we found within Europe are very much related with the type of industrial relations, or if you want, the type of trade unions and employees association relationships. We found, for example, that in Spain and Germany, they have very encompassing industrial relations institutions, and this has prevents these companies to get into these markets and do whatever they want to do. On the other hand, for example, in Portugal, the weak and low-density labor trade unions were not able to defend the markets, and laws would change with a lot of lobbying from companies, and they got into these countries and were able to penetrate and be successful here. And to finalize it, my final idea is that these business models of these platform companies vary significantly in digital platforms. Uber, for example, in Portugal, works very differently from Spain. Here they are ride hailing, as well as they do food delivering, as well as they distribute and rent bicycles in the big cities. In Spain, they are not really big, and taxi drivers are really strong. So I think the lesson is that if you want to engage and protect labor rights, the important thing is to make your voice heard in your home country, near the legislative bodies, and make sure that these companies do not enter and transform your labor rights into nothing, as probably they will in your country. So back to you, Barbara. Thank you very much for these 5 minutes. I'm here at your disposal.
Thank you, Nuno. All right, you can go ahead and turn off your camera for now, and I will ask Amelia to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. Hi. And coming to us from India, would you please take 5 minutes and introduce us to the work that you've been doing?
Thank you so much, Barbara, and a big thanks to my co-panelists for flagging urgent issues related to gig and platform work. Hi, everyone. This is Sai Amelia Komaraju from India, a brown woman with curly hair, wearing a white frock with blue embroidery. My research over the last 8 years has been at the intersection of communication studies, digital cultures, and feminist theory. For the last 3 years, as the lead researcher of platformized salon services at FemLab and principal investigator of a Future of Workers project funded by the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, University of Witwatersrand, my research has focused on examining the gender dynamics of digital labor platforms and how workers organize themselves from a feminist lens. At FemLab, or Feminist Approaches to Labor Collectives, as we call it, we centered the experiences of women workers at the bottom of the supply chain and working in the informal sectors of construction, sanitation, platformized salon work, artisanal work, and ride-hailing in India. We examined the challenges women workers face and how they use digital technologies to organize or collectivize themselves for better working conditions and, in general, navigating platform work. Why women workers in these particular sectors? The logic of masculinity informs what is considered work, who is considered a worker, and what work timings are. Therefore, women performing care work, women in ride-hailing services, who are drivers, women in artisanal work are often overlooked in academic literature and other popular discourses, especially in platform work. What we call Uberization of platform work, men in the visible professions of ride-hailing and or delivery at the cost of women drivers and women in home-based platform economy, such as beauty work and domestic work, professions that are informal and unorganized. Now, gig economy comprises of both platform and non-platform work and fall into the informal sector primarily by virtue of the absence of an employer-employee relationship. Gig work and platform companies are increasingly important sector of the economy and have actively resisted compliance with existing policies that govern companies and their formal relationships. Our field work across sectors suggests that how gig and platform work is perceived by workers, the benefits and challenges of such work are contingent on gender and context. And here context includes which country and region, nature and site of work. For instance, both salon and domestic work involve care work of different kinds. One involves bodily care and cleansing, and the other involves home care and cleaning. Both stigmatized in countries like India because of the fact that they involve eliminating impurities of bodies and homes. In India, the entrenched caste system is such that any work involving waste is relegated to those at the bottom of the caste hierarchy. Globally, statistics show that such undesirable, indecent work is performed by immigrants and refugees, mostly Black, brown, let's just say mostly non-white publics who belong to non-dominant classes. Our research indicates that there are wins and losses associated with platform work. Women workers in the salon sector, for instance, are happy that once stigmatized salon work is now being professionalized and organized through digital labor platforms. They're also aware of the trade-offs that they're making and actively exercising agency. At FemLab, we've been very careful about framing issues of platform work to also focus on what women workers say has worked for them. For instance, professionalization of care work that they're involved in, flexibility and improved earning are wins for them. But that does not mean that platform work is not precarious. Information asymmetry, obscure algorithms at work, nudging workers to take up just another gig. Right? These all mark this work. And this is where laws are important, both country specific and at the global level, to empower workers so they don't lose out on work opportunities and are not forced to make trade-offs. The current laws in India don't favor gig workers and platform workers. There is a difficulty in even defining who gig workers are and who platform workers are. This has meant that workers have had to organize themselves to make themselves heard. However, like most unions in India, these unions working on the voices and on voicing the concerns of workers and their welfare are dominated by men and focused on work in public spaces such as platform drivers and delivery workers. Does that mean that there is no mobilization amongst women workers in other kinds of work? It would seem so if one were to imagine collectivization and mobilizing is limited to trade unions. Our research shows that in order to resist and protest against exploitation by both platforms and customers, women workers in specific segments like salon work are mobilizing themselves through WhatsApp groups and whisper networks. However, these collectivizations aren't enough. We need the four interdependent forces of regulation, which is law, architecture or design in this case, social norms and market, to be transformed to achieve dignity in work, dignity at work, and dignity from work. Thank you so much, Barbara, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for sharing, Amulya. You can keep your camera on and stay here with me. I'd like to invite Jane and Nuno to turn your cameras back on. And again, for anyone who is listening to us live, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. I can see one there, which is fantastic. We'll come back to that in a few moments. But wonderful, now that we have the three of you together, I want to give you space to ask each other questions, to clarify or, get a better picture. So I know that Jane has a question for Amulya, so we can start there, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question, Jane. And you can all just leave your cameras on, the three of you, so we'll stay together.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Yes, Professor Amulya, when we look at the online digital jobs for young women in Nairobi or in Kenya, we find that they may not be able, sometimes they are able to get onto the platforms. Other times they may be going for days without work, and this compels them then to take up any job available, even when the task may not be paying, maybe paying below the minimum wage. So the question I have for you is, how have you been able to organize and support young women to be able to continuously access digital tasks that you would consider as giving decent jobs to these young women?
Thank you so much for the question, Jane. FemLab is an action research-based project. We do not provide gigs to women. We do not organize them, but because of the kind of lens that we've adopted, feminist lens, we've tried to see how we can energize organizing that has already been going on. For instance, women workers on digital platform, working for digital platforms, have been organizing themselves through WhatsApp groups. And our endeavor has been to understand how we can energize them with the support of NGOs and civil society organizations already working in these sectors and connecting women to such collectives and organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Has the government been supportive in registering those collectives?
The government has promised time and again that there's a bill that has been tabled in the parliament for a long time, but that has not seen the light of day, and they still seem to be discussing and operationalizing what gig work means, what platform work means, and there's a lot of homework to be done by the state. But the think tank called Niti Aayog, that is supported by the government of India, has been doing a lot of background work and research to understand the kind of populations, the demography that is involved in this kind of work, and what they can do to leverage the demographic dividend. But that is still in the stages of planning, not at the execution stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Amulya.
I do have a question for Jane, if I may, Barbara.
Perfect. Yes, please do.
Thank you so much. Jane, thank you so much for that description of the work that you've been doing. I'm just wondering, mostly digital platforms, digital labor platforms have their own terms and conditions. Is a part of your, as part of what you already do you also educate workers in terms of translating what can be complex legal jargon of the terms and conditions, translate them into something that is understandable for the general population who are doing this kind of work?
Thank you so much. So for the toolkit, we provide the digital skills or even upskilling, because sometimes we have partners who want a certain set of digital skills that the young women we are connecting to these jobs may not possess. So we have an upskilling program, And we also discuss with the partners who want to get access to the database of Toolkit skilled digital workers. We ask them what is on offer. And we've had to turn down some things because we could see that they are going to offer an opportunity for work, but in reality, it is not an opportunity for work because they wanted to pay lower wages than what the person would earn if they were doing manual work in a domestic in somebody's home or even at a construction site. And that wage is the take-home wage without counting the costs. And a lot of these young women will then have to pay, they incur the cost of being on the internet continuously for the digital task. We have, however, had a very good experience with one platform that has social justice ethos from France. They're called Isahit, and they've given us opportunity for young women to work for a period of up to 2 years, so long as they are either in college or they have a project. And this is what we have found to be one of the most decent digital jobs because they pay €3 per hour. Many of the others will fall far way below. And in that sense, we've had to encourage the young women to wait until they can find an online employer, even if they are freelancing, that at least would give them a wage that meets their costs and gives them some wage to live off. Thank you.
Thanks to both of you. I actually want to come to Nuno and ask, because both Jane and Amelia were talking a bit about the gender divide, and I'm curious if you've seen similar things in the research that you've done, and if you can address that as well.
Thank you, Barbara. Most of our research was carried out in platforms who are in Europe, mostly male, although some females could be found, with the exception of professional services where freelancers go to Upwork, and there you might find the majority is female, highly skilled females. So although we could find some unskilled females working in Uber drivers or as in food distributions, they are mostly done by males.
And so is the fact that there's maybe less research about it due to what Amelia was describing as things maybe not being considered work, and so the women aren't being counted in those places? Or like, do you understand, like, could there be some other reason, or it's just the type of work? Like, what accounts for the fact that you're seeing less females because there's enough women in the workforce?
Okay, so one of the reasons might be that a large proportion of this labor force are composed by immigrants, and they tend to be dominated by males. The other one is that gig work is seen in these 4 countries that we study in Europe as a kind of either a part-time job, and therefore females do not have the ability to do more than one job, as normally you would find here, or because simply they see this gig economy as a more precarious, less interesting and advantageous for them than actually having a job with all the rights and employment rights that come with it. So I think that's probably an explanation that takes into consideration at least these 3 aspects.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That helps to give a bigger picture. Amelia, thanks for raising your hand. How would you like to respond?
Thank you, Nuno, for talking about this dimension, for Barbara flagging it as well. I'm wondering, are there issues with accessibility to digital technologies amongst these immigrant women? Do you have anything on statistics on the accessibility of digital technologies, mobile phone devices, internet?
Okay, we know that traditionally those professions connected with the ICTs, with information communication technology, they are also dominated by males, and there's a low proportion of females. On the other hand, you can also argue that for most of these jobs, you only need a mobile phone. Well, it has to be a good one, and this has a cost associated with it, and that is probably one reason accounting for some discrimination. And also there's in some of these jobs like ride hailing or food distribution, they are also dangerous. And you can also find networks of criminal activity sometimes related to it. And I think the propensity is to have more males doing these jobs because they are dangerous. Yeah, here, at least in Europe. Thank you very much for the question, Amelia.
Jane, I think you also had a question for Nuno, is that right?
Yes, thank you so much, Nuno. What I wanted to find out in terms of the research is where do you see the legal protection coming in terms of is in your research, are you able to see are the laws changing? Is there an inclination to protect these online workers legally? Are the traditional methods of social justice for labor movements beginning to kick in, or what would you say?
Okay, it is different if you talk about Germany than what you find out in Spain or in Hungary or in Portugal. You would see that there is now one directive approved at the European Parliament, and that directive stimulated a lot of debates in European countries about the gig economy and to what extent it can hinder labor rights. It was very much debated here in Europe. And there is a lot of positions in the European Parliament towards creating more national legislation. And the directive also is very influential. So although in Germany, for example, you have very good legislation protecting the workers doing platform work, in other countries that came later. For example, last year in Spain, they have passed legislation towards protecting food distribution in the country. They have previous one with about Uber and ride hailing. For example, in the other two countries, such as Portugal and Hungary, there was no legislation until very recently. In Portugal, it was approved 2 weeks ago. They are trying to give proper employment to these workers here in Portugal, but in Hungary, you cannot see any move towards legislations. So although you find the debates are increasing and they tend to create a critical mass to approve legislation to protect these workers and integrate them into the labor force, there is still some work to be done in other countries, such as Portugal and even in Hungary, as I told you. This is a slow process. It takes time people to get conscious about the need to integrate these labor into the proper labor force. But eventually we will get there in a few years, probably. The whole Europe will have laws defending these workers, and also commercial laws towards how these business models actually work, and if they are doing some everything correctly and not taking advantage of unfair competition, as some of them are. But I guess in the end, it will take some time to have proper situation stabilized. It's a new thing to a certain extent, and that societies need to debate and to integrate and then to move on with regulations. I wonder how is in Kenya. Probably you can give us about the regulations that could come into force in the next years, Jane.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nuno, because the kind of research you have done, I think it reveals really also the need for awareness by the workers. The situation, as we have seen in Kenya, is what has been most organized is, of course, the taxi hailing apps like Uber. There have been several rounds of strikes by Uber drivers where they felt that maybe it was they were not being able to meet their ends, especially since the cost of living is rising daily, just like elsewhere on the globe, given the war in Europe. So that's, I think, the closest we have seen to an organized form or even awareness. But that is because they are all on one app. It's very different when it comes to freelancers, the youth that we have trained for online work, because they're really not in a situation, they don't have, they're not on one platform, they're working individually, sometimes it's freelancing, but even where they work in a group, it's still very difficult for them to organize themselves in a way that would give them any leverage or any lever to stop work, because the threat is, if you don't want to do it, there are many others waiting in line to do the digital task. In terms of the legislation, what we have seen is there is definitely a lot of awareness. Our government is very digitally aware. Kenya has a very good framework, like for the digital economy. Government services are digitized. There has been a law on data protection, but in terms of digital jobs and digital tasks that are given to Kenyan workers by multinationals, there is really not much. It is still too new. And unfortunately, even the visibility that has been there is for the most negative things. The unethical one where people just highlight, American students are sending their thesis to Kenyan students who are very brilliant but cannot afford to go to university to write for them the thesis. So sometimes you find that it is more the worst news that is making it to getting the publicity, but not really the honest hard work of Kenyan gig workers that are being exploited or are unable to make ends meet despite putting in their best effort in terms of trying to access digital devices, remaining online to complete the digital tasks. And like I said at the beginning, the accuracy levels expected of this work are so high, and there is no element even of training for the gig worker. So there is no training. It's just a question of, this is the task, this is the accuracy. If you don't meet it, we don't pay you. But they have really no recourse. And that is where I think it then comes back to what we were saying at the beginning of, where then do we start the conversation about a decent pay or a decent job for a young woman sitting in Nairobi, confronted by a multinational sitting in California or elsewhere on the globe. Thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Amelia, I'm going to come over to you.
Thanks, Barbara. I have a question for both Nuno and Jane. In India, we have a fairly strong unionization organization amongst taxi drivers. Then Uber comes in and disrupts what is a very well-organized taxi occupation. And they've sort of divided drivers into private taxi drivers and ride-hailing platform drivers, diluting the unity amongst workers. Do you see similar repercussions in, say, Kenya and in Portugal or other places that you've conducted research in?
Well, if
Maybe
I may,
I can. Okay, go ahead, Nuno.
well, if I may say that Uber had a very bad entrance in Portugal, for example. They start lobbying politicians before they open up the company, and they ask politicians not to pay attention to regulations, and then suddenly they start as an innovation in society, and kind of got into the front door of the economy suddenly, and the ability for Uber drivers to organize was very much hindered by the fact that the legislation forced Uber drivers to have their own companies, so forced them to have an intermediary between them and the multinational. Therefore, the organization, the labor organization and the collective representation of these workers is very, very poor. Nevertheless, it is the only situation where we have traditional labor trade unions trying to organize workers, and they actually were successful. They were able to organize workers in big cities, and they are now representing Uber drivers and ride-hailing as a whole. If you look at, for example, food distribution, it is still in the infancy, still beginning to have the first contacts with food distributors, and it's very difficult. So the strategies the multinationals adopt is very aggressive. They, as many analysts have been saying, they are burning venture capital in Silicon Valley to using unfair competition in the other markets. And by doing that, they destroyed the organization of taxi drivers, which, by the way, was low density. They were not very organized. And now you only have Uber drivers starting to be organized and no more taxi drivers. If you look in Spain, it's the other way around. They are very highly organized, the taxis, our neighbors. They are very organized with the trade unions, and they were able to face Uber. It's not expressive in Spain anymore, neither in Germany. Uber doesn't work in Germany, neither in Hungary. So it depends a lot on the reaction and how you prepare the entrance of a company in one country, I would say. It's an interesting question. Jane, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. Yes, and yes, I would add to what Nuno has said, because it was similar in Kenya. At the entry of Uber, it was initially very difficult for organized Kenyan taxi associations that were already working, whether it's at the airport or in Kenya, we have a huge hospitality industry. And of course, for Uber, they came in much more organized. They're using an app that is very well supported. It doesn't have downtime. And there were many young people who didn't own a taxi that were able to either take out credit or were able to go to that initial concept of Uber, that for people who own a car and they're not using it the whole day, they would give it to somebody to earn for them extra income. It disrupted the taxi transport system. There have been challenges, clashes, and the good thing is that there are also some local apps that then came up. So like Little Cab and others. And although these are not like strictly very large competition for Uber, what then it turned out to be, most of the taxi companies were then also compelled to join some of these apps. Otherwise, they were badly hit in terms of their regular revenue that they were used to for years. And I think it's not just on the cab hailing services. I think there is now this, increasingly we are seeing these global monopolies that come in with a lot of strength, and it's across different value chains because they have the funding, they have digital systems that can run throughout. And I think this then disrupts a lot of other work. We have seen, for example, of course, when they come in, there is a lot of marketing, like this is really great. They can deliver everything that you have. But then like in Kenya, we have the Mama Boga, who is the lady who sells vegetables. And of course, if everybody then will order vegetables online and they can be delivered, it will definitely affect such livelihoods. And of course, we still have also to look at the digital divide, because it may not be possible for the Mama Boga to jump into that value chain, acquire the digital skills, acquire access to a smart device, and in any way connect to income from her traditional vegetable retailing to now moving to an online system where part of her work is paying a commission to a big organization, a big company, a global North corporation. So I think there's still a lot of issues. When we talk about the gig economy, there is still a lot. We are still seeing the initial repercussions of this, of what these are doing to livelihoods. And maybe the taxi hailing is one, but increasingly there are many others. And that question will have to be then asked on both sides, on the legal protection, but also how do we create awareness and organization so that when livelihoods are disrupted, there is an alternative, because it's affecting somebody's income, somebody's children, somebody's health bill, and other aspects that cannot just be wished away. And we say globalization has kicked in with the digital solutions because it doesn't translate that easily, that these digital solutions are meeting the needs of the worker that they're displacing.
Oh, my goodness, Jane, I think you've done a really good job summarizing a lot of the issues for gig work. And I don't think it's just in the global South either. I think the global North is seeing these problems as well, that gig work is taking over traditional work environments and not providing people with like the social insurances and framework that traditional or jobs in the past have as well. So this is actually quite a big topic. Our time is running out, and so thank you, first of all, but I have, there have been some great questions. There's a question from Mutoni in the chat, and I wonder, Jane, if you might be able to address that in the chat, because it seems like a relatively simple answer about how workers are paid. But I want to, Ushnish asked a really interesting question, in my opinion, because it goes, and Amulya said it too, because it goes to some of the cultural issues that this gig economy brings with it. And it's, in the context of gig work, do you see replication of US or Eurocentric values based on incentives and rewards? Particularly thinking of gig work in content moderation, labeling of AI, but also theoretically transportation, for instance, the US model of individual car ownership. So we just have a couple minutes, but I am wondering if particularly Amulya or Jane, you have examples of when you've seen some of this maybe transfer of values from the North to the South, or assumption of transfer of values. I'm seeing you nodding your head, Amulya, so I'll come over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Ushnish, for such a great question. And it's not just transportation either. This is even in the case of platformized salon services. For instance, there is an assumption on the part of the platforms, digital platforms, that service partners have private vehicles and would actually take up gig work if given enough impetus, if given enough incentives. While some women may have private vehicles to go to a gig, to go to a task at, say, in the late evenings or nights, some of them are dropped to their location by their husbands. So married women workers think of it as safety network. If you think of high-risk areas where they might be molested or raped, there are high-risk areas in India, like say Noida or Delhi. In that case, women workers think of it as a safety net. For them to take up a late evening slot is then entirely dependent on the demand and their husband's availability. There's an assumption on the part of the platforms that these decisions are taken by an individual on an individual level, when in reality it really isn't. The partner, and by extension, the family, is just as involved in these decision-making processes. And that is something that platforms don't take into account as well, what we call shadows of context. This context is important, and although I don't want to stereotype India as a collective culture, there is definitely a difference between the individualistic culture of, say, the US or the Europe in general, and the kind of culture that is dominant in other societies in the global South. That was a great question. Thank you, Ushnish.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Amulya. Jane, is there has something come to mind, something you would like to share from your experience in Kenya as well?
No, not exactly.
Okay, great. Nuno, have you seen anything in your research that would address this question?
There are some elements of being against the platforms, for example, in Germany. They simply didn't want to have this Uberization of the economy, and they closed the doors, and Uber was not able to get in, as well as many other food distributors and so on. So, I mean, they don't agree with this type of individualistic approach and also free riding and so on, and they just close it. And they do it not just by issuing laws, but also because the institutions are very much against throughout to the public debate. And they know it's going to happen in a public debate. They prepare themselves very well in their institutions, and they are strongly against this type of operations from these companies. And they didn't get in to the German market, for example. And that's also true to a certain extent in Spain. The organization of these forces is very important to prevent them to get in and to have them in their own way, at least.
Yeah. I mean, but in the case of Uber, they were delayed, but they have entered the German market. They're everywhere in Berlin. So
Well,
it took more time and money maybe to throw at it, but many taxi drivers are also Uber drivers here.
maybe, yeah, but that's 1 decade afterwards. Here they start in 2014. I mean, they're in the beginning, and they established a lobby company to make sure that their efforts were very good, and they did it their own way.
Right. Okay.
I guess we welcome this kind of Anglo-Saxon model of the economy, and therefore, for example, in Portugal, it's easier than it would be in Spain or Germany.
Okay. And I hate to say, I think our time is up because we need to finish on time. So we're going to have to leave it there. But I think what's become clear from what I've heard from the three of you today, and by the way, thank you so much to all three of you for your input, for your wonderful questions for each other, and your thoughts and insights on this topic. Gig work is still so new, and what is clear to me as an action point for civil society organizations is bringing much more awareness to governments about laws that are needed to be made because it's new and it's not something that we've experienced before and have to now create protections for. And so I hope that those of you who are listening will take that with you from this time together and be loud about making clear what's been happening and some of the issues for gig workers. So once again, thank you to the three of you, to Jane, Amelia, and Nuno for joining us this afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Thank you very, very much to our international sign interpreters and captioner for their very hard work with us today. And finally, thanks to all of you who've joined us from wherever you are in the world. Thanks for your attention and for your great questions.